Hi, my name is Adrienne Davidson, and today I'll be talking about expanding self-compassion and with a focus on neurodivergence, ethics, and cultural considerations. So before we're going to dive into the complexities of neurodivergence, culture, and ethics, let's start by defining self-compassion and why it matters. So self-compassion, as defined by Dr. Kristin Neff, the godmother of self-compassion, it consists of three elements: self-kindness, treating yourself with care and understanding rather than harsh self-judgment. 2, common humanity, recognizing that struggles and imperfections are part of the human experience rather than feeling isolated and failure. 3, mindfulness, observing negative thoughts and emotions without suppressing or exaggerating them. So research has shown that people with higher self-compassion experience less stress, anxiety, and burnout and have greater resilience in the face of challenges. It also fosters healthier coping mechanisms and stronger interpersonal relationships. But despite these benefits, many individuals struggle with self-compassion, especially those who are neurodivergent or come from cultures that view self-compassion as self-indulgence. So this is why it's crucial to expand our perspective and consider how compassion can be adapted to be more inclusive and accessible for all. As we move forward, we will explore what existing research gets right, where it falls short, and how we can address those gaps. So while self-compassion research has grown significantly, there are some notable gaps in how it is studied and applied. The majority of self-compassion interventions are designed for neurotypical individuals, assuming that everyone processes emotions and self-reflection in the same way. However, some individuals with ADHD, autism, or other neurodivergent conditions often experience unique barriers to self-compassion, such as emotional regulation difficulties and heightened self-criticism. Another overlooked area is cultural differences in self-compassion. Many self-compassion models are rooted in Western individualistic frameworks where personal well-being is prioritized. However, in collectivist cultures, many people see self-compassion as self-indulgent or selfish, leading them to avoid practices that prioritize self-kindness. Additionally, existing research often lacks diversity in participant samples, meaning that findings may not fully apply to people of different racial, gender, or socioeconomic backgrounds. Lastly, there is limited exploration of ethical considerations, like how can mental health professionals responsibly encourage self-compassion without invalidating cultural or neurodivergent perspectives. So these gaps really highlight the need for a broader, more inclusive approach to self-compassion, one that takes neurodiversity, cultural beliefs, and ethical responsibilities into account. So in this presentation, we will focus on these three critical areas that require greater attention in self-compassion research and practice. Number 1 is neurodivergence. Individuals with ADHD, autism, giftedness, and learning disabilities experience unique challenges when it comes to self-compassion. We'll explore how traditional self-compassion strategies can be adapted to better support neurodivergent individuals. Number 2, ethical considerations. Mental health professionals and educators have a responsibility to promote self-compassion in a way that is inclusive and non-harmful. We will discuss how to ensure self-compassion practices do not reinforce ableism or dismiss cultural values. Number 3, cultural influences. Cultural Black backgrounds play a significant role in shaping how people perceive self-compassion. What works in individualistic culture may not resonate in a collectivist society. So we will explore how to tailor self-compassion strategies to be more culturally sensitive. And by addressing these areas, we can create a more comprehensive, inclusive, and effective approach to self-compassion, one that benefits everyone, regardless of neurotype or cultural background. So now that we have established the importance of self-compassion, let's take a look at what existing research tells us. Over the past 2 decades, self-compassion has been widely studied, particularly through the work of Dr. Kristin Neff, who first conceptualized self-compassion as a 3-part framework: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Studies have consistently shown that higher levels of self-compassion are associated with reduced stress, anxiety, and depression, lower levels of burnout and emotional exhaustion, particularly in helping professions, increased resilience, allowing individuals to bounce back more effectively from challenges, healthier coping mechanisms leading to greater emotional regulation and well-being, Additionally, neurological studies have shown that self-compassion activates the brain's soothing system, which increases oxytocin while decreasing cortisol, the stress hormone. This means that self-compassion is not just a psychological tool, it has a biological basis for improving emotional health. However, while these findings are significant, most studies have focused on neurotypical individuals and Western perspectives of self-compassion. So this raises important questions about who these findings apply to and how they can be adapted to diverse populations. So let's take a closer look at the limitations in the existing studies. While self-compassion research has provided valuable insights, it's important to recognize its limitations. One major limitation is that most studies rely on self-report surveys, which means that individual biases, social desirability, or lack of self-awareness can impact the results. There is a need for more objective neurological and longitudinal studies to better understand how self-compassion develops over time. Another issue is that most research focuses on the neurotypical individuals, assuming that everyone processes self-kindness, mindfulness, and emotional regulation in the same way. However, as we will explore in the next section, neurodivergent individuals do face some unique barriers to self-compassion that these studies often fail to account for. Additionally, cultural biases in research mean that most self-compassion interventions are designed from an individualistic Western perspective. In individualistic cultures, self-compassion may be perceived differently, and there is limited research on how these cultural differences impact self-compassion practices. Lastly, most studies do not consider the intersectionality of self-compassion. Factors like race, gender identity, socioeconomic status, and disability are rarely explored in depth. Without addressing these dimensions, self-compassion models remain incomplete and potentially ineffective for marginalized communities. These limitations highlight the need for more inclusive, diverse, and adaptable approaches to self-compassion. So let's examine one of the most significant gaps, the lack of focus on neurodivergent individuals. One of the most critical gaps in self-compassion research is that lack of focus on neurodivergent individuals. Despite growing awareness of neurodivergence in psychology, most self-compassion models assume a neurotypical way of processing emotions, thoughts, and self-reflection. So this is problematic because neurodivergent individuals often face unique challenges in developing self-compassion. Like people with ADHD may struggle with impulsivity and rejection sensitivity, which makes it harder to practice self-kindness in moments of frustration. Autistic individuals often experience black and white thinking, which can lead to rigid self-criticism instead of balanced self-compassion. And individuals with dyslexia or learning disabilities may face a lifelong academic struggle, reinforcing feelings of inadequacy that makes self-compassion more difficult to cultivate. Another overlooked aspect is how neurodivergence affects emotional regulation. Many self-compassion exercises, such as mindfulness and self-soothing techniques, require emotional awareness and control, which may be more challenging for those with executive function dysfunction or sensory processing differences. Furthermore, neurodivergent individuals often receive more criticism throughout their lives, whether from teachers or peers or workplaces, and this can really lead to deep-seated negative self-perceptions that make self-compassion seem unnatural or even uncomfortable. So to create a more inclusive approach to self-compassion, we need to understand these challenges and develop strategies that are tailored to neurodivergent needs. So let's now explore how neurodivergence impacts self-compassion in greater detail. Neurodivergence can significantly impact how individuals experience and practice self-compassion. Many self-compassion models assume that people can easily recognize their emotions, regulate their responses, and engage in self-kindness. However, for neurodivergent individuals, this process is not always straightforward due to factors such as emotional dysregulation. Like many neurodivergent individuals experience stronger and more intense emotions that can make it difficult to apply self-compassion in the moment. Or rejection sensitivity. People with ADHD and autism often have a heightened sensitivity to criticism, making self-compassion harder to accept. Or cognitive rigidity. Some neurodivergent individuals engage in that black and white, all or nothing thinking, where mistakes feel catastrophic rather than normal parts of growth. For example, an autistic person might struggle with self-compassion after making a minor social mistake because they perceive it as a total failure. Similarly, someone with ADHD might find it difficult to forgive themselves for procrastination, leading to this cycle of guilt and self-judgment. And this is why traditional self-compassion strategies may need to be adapted to better fit neurodivergent experiences. So instead of only relying on techniques designed for neurotypicals, we need to explore alternative and accessible ways of fostering that self-compassion. So on the next slide, we'll discuss some specific challenges that neurodivergent individuals face when they're trying to develop self-compassion and what we can do as therapists to support them. As we've discussed, neurodivergent individuals often face unique challenges when it comes to practicing self-compassion. And these challenges aren't just personal barriers. They are shaped by neurology, life experience, and societal expectations. There are three major challenges that neurodivergent individuals face. Number one is heightened self-criticism and internalized stigma. Many neurodivergents have experienced years of negative feedback from teachers, peers, and workplaces, leading to deep-seated self-doubt and harsh self-judgment. For example, a person with ADHD may have been told for years that they're lazy or irresponsible, making it difficult to develop that self-kindness instead of self-blame. Number two is difficulty with emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is often a challenge for individuals with ADHD, autism, and sensory processing disorders. If a person struggles with managing frustration, disappointment, or rejection, it becomes so much harder to pause and offer themselves that compassion in those moments. Number three is struggles with traditional mindfulness practices. Many self-compassion exercises involve mindfulness techniques such as deep breathing or body scans or quiet reflection. However, these may not be accessible for individuals with heightened sensory sensitivities, hyperactivity, or cognitive rigidity. Some people feel really uncomfortable with stillness or prolonged self-reflection, making movement-based or structured self-compassion exercises more effective alternatives. So understanding these challenges is a first step in developing better self-compassion strategies for neurodivergent individuals. And so next, we will explore why self-compassion practices need adaptation and how we can make them more inclusive. Given these unique challenges, traditional self-compassion techniques are just sometimes not effective for neurodivergent individuals, as I've said many times. Instead of assuming that these one-size-fits-all approaches will work, we need to tailor these practices to be just more accessible and supportive. So here's three ways that we can adapt self-compassion strategies. So number one is reframing negative self-talk. Many neurodivergents engage in really harsh self-criticism due to their past experiences. So instead of forcing these positive affirmations, an alternative approach would be like cognitive reframing, challenging those negative thoughts and replacing them with something more balanced and self-compassionate. So for example, instead of saying, I always fail at this, a person can practice saying, this is hard for me, but I'm learning and improving. Number two is alternative forms of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a core component of self-compassion, but not all the forms work for all individuals. So instead of like stillness-based mindfulness, which can be difficult for individuals with ADHD or sensory sensitivities, alternative approaches could include like movement-based mindfulness, like stretching or walking, or repetitive actions like knitting. Guided audio exercises instead of like silent meditation. I know that's something that I really am drawn to. Sensory-friendly environments that support comfort and regulation. Being aware of our space in our offices and seeing if we, can get some fidget toys and have some background music or noise or dimming the lights. So just making it comfortable. Maybe having a soft blanket or something that's comfortable for that individual. Number three is structured self-compassion practices. Individuals with executive dysfunction may struggle with that unstructured self-care routine. So providing those clear step-by-step self-compassion practices just make it more manageable. So like using written prompts for journaling or preset affirmations or reminders for self-care breaks can help like integrate self-compassion into daily life. So by adapting these self-compassion strategies to align with needs of our neurodivergent clients, these practices just become more inclusive and effective. A lot of the people that show up in therapy really are neurodivergent, and often they're, late diagnosed or still undiagnosed because they get a lot of criticism in their life. So it really does impact their mental health. So next, we're going to talk about practical applications of self-compassion strategies in counseling and in education. So now that we understand the challenges and the adaptations that are needed for neurodivergent individuals, let's discuss how self-compassion strategies can be integrated into counseling, into education, and professional settings. So here's 3 key ways that we can integrate self-compassion into therapy and coaching. So building self-compassion into the daily reflection. So encouraging clients or students to reflect on moments when they are overly critical of themselves and helping them to reframe those experiences with self-compassionate language. Number 2, teaching self-compassion as a skill. So self-compassion is not just an attitude, it is a skill that we can learn. So using these structured exercises like self-compassion journaling prompts can really help our clients actively develop self-compassion habits. Number 3, using personalized coping strategies. So not everyone benefits from the same coping techniques, so really providing that personalized self-compassion strategies, whether through visual reminders or movement-based practices or social support systems, can make self-compassion more sustainable. And by integrating these strategies into counseling and education, we can help our clients build lifelong self-compassion skills. So next, we will go over kind of how to tailor these strategies specifically for our neurodivergent clients. So many traditional self-compassion strategies, again, really assume that neurotypical way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. But for our neurodivergent clients, these approaches really do need to be modified to be really effective. So what I use in my practice is I do self-report measures for autism and ADHD, and I really try to focus on that and screen for it. So if that's something that's going on, then I can kind of tailor things accordingly. So 3 ways to tailor self-compassion strategies for neurodivergent individuals would include 1, providing clear and predictable structures. So a lot of neurodivergent folks will really benefit from structured approaches rather than open-ended reflection. So using checklists and scripts or visual reminders can really help it become more accessible to practice those skills. Incorporating special interests. A lot of neurodivergent individuals find comfort and joy in their special interests. So using those interests to frame self-compassionate thinking can be a really helpful way to make self-kindness just really more natural. And 3 would be encouraging self-compassionate externalization. So some individuals struggle with direct self-compassion, but find it easier when it's externalized. So writing a letter to a younger version of themselves or imagining what they would say to a friend in a similar situation can make self-compassion just more intuitive because they're comfortable with that. They've done that before. So by making these strategies neurodivergent friendly, this really helps to remove those barriers and create approaches that will actually work for the people who really need them the most. So next, we will look at mindfulness and cognitive restructuring and how they can play a role in really improving that self-compassion. So as we continue discussing how to tailor these strategies, a really important few tools stand out here, like mindfulness and cognitive restructuring. Mindfulness is a really well-documented approach to fostering self-compassion, but for neurodivergence, traditional mindfulness techniques are not always effective, as we discussed previously. So a few ways that we can make it more accessible is those alternative forms of mindfulness, like instead of silent meditation, which sometimes drives people stir crazy if they have prefrontal cortex things going on and it's just really hard for them to focus and control their monkey mind. They could do, the active mindfulness, like movement or repetitive rhythmic movements like walking or rocking or doodling. I always have art stuff in my office and find that a lot of my clients will be drawn to that, just kind of doodle and color in when we're just chatting in therapy. So using sensory-based mindfulness, like listening to that calming music or weighted blankets or engaging in tactile activities, like how I mentioned, I have a box of kind of fidget toys in my office. So by providing that variety of mindfulness options, people can choose what works best for them instead of forcing themselves into a method that feels unnatural to them. So practice and experimentation is really great here. Cognitive restructuring for self-compassion. Many neurodivergents will have that black and white thinking or negative self-talk, and cognitive restructuring can really help by identifying those self-critical thoughts and challenging their accuracy. So using self-compassionate language to reframe mistakes as learning experiences instead of failures. Encouraging growth-oriented thinking, like, that was difficult for me, but I'm improving with practice, instead of, oh, I'm just bad at this. And combining both approaches, like integrating mindfulness and cognitive restructuring together, can really create a powerful self-compassion practice. For example, a client might notice their self-critical thoughts through mindfulness and then use cognitive restructuring to shift their perspective. And over time, these practices help our clients develop a more self-compassionate mindset, reducing that emotional distress and increasing their resilience. So as we are tailoring these techniques for neurodivergence, it's also important to consider the ethical considerations of promoting self-compassion in diverse populations. So let's explore that next. Self-compassion is often framed as a universal concept, but in reality, it is deeply shaped by cultural influences. Many self-compassion interventions are really based in Western individualistic values, which emphasize personal growth, self-care, and self-acceptance. However, in collectivist cultures, self-compassion may be viewed very differently. So some cultural influences to consider include self-compassion versus self-indulgence. So in Western cultures, self-compassion is encouraged as a way to promote, our mental health and our well-being and self-care. But in some collectivist cultures, prioritizing oneself may be perceived as selfish or indulgent, which really makes it harder to engage in that self-compassion. And an emphasis on group harmony. Like many collectivist cultures will prioritize group well-being over the individual needs, which means that self-compassion may need to be framed as a way to support others rather than just benefiting oneself. Like, when I take care of myself, I'm better able to take care of my family and community. And it's interesting in this cultural conversation is that that's one thing that I really find applicable to mothers and women in general, because we often, it is kind of a Western concept or norm that women really do sacrifice a lot to take care of their children and their home and family. And it's really important to frame it as a way to really support others, because if you crash and burn, you're not going to be able to show up and take care of your family. So the role of spirituality and cultural considerations. In some cultures, self-compassion is really closely linked to spiritual beliefs and traditional practices. And understanding these cultural nuances allows us as mental health professionals to integrate culturally relevant self-compassion strategies rather than solely relying on Western models. And by acknowledging these cultural differences, we can ensure that self-compassion practices are culturally sensitive and inclusive, rather than imposing that one-size-fits-all approach that we know just does not work in all cases. So let's talk a little bit more about the ethical responsibilities of professionals like us who are promoting self-compassion. As we integrate self-compassion into counseling and education, it's really important to consider those ethical responsibilities. We as therapists, educators, and advocates really have to ensure that self-compassion practices are introduced in a way that's inclusive, respectful, and beneficial to all individuals. So 3 key ethical considerations. Number 1, avoiding psychological harm, right? So self-compassion intervention should never be forced on people who are not ready for them. Some people with trauma or deep self-criticism really feel uncomfortable practicing self-kindness. Ethical practice involves introducing self-compassion gradually and ensuring it is framed in a way that feels safe for each person. We have to recognize those individual differences. Just as we've discussed with neurodivergent individuals and cultural differences, self-compassion practices really should be adapted to fit the individual rather than expecting individuals to conform to a single model. Balancing self-compassion with accountability. Ethical self-compassion should not be mistaken for avoiding responsibility. It is important to teach our clients that self-compassion allows for growth and learning rather than just excusing mistakes. Ethical responsibility means helping our clients find a balance between self-kindness and self-improvement. By ensuring that self-compassion is promoted in a safe and ethical and inclusive way, we can maximize its benefits for all individuals. So our next section will discuss on how to avoid ableism when promoting self-compassion. One of the biggest ethical challenges when we're discussing self-compassion is ensuring that we avoid ableism, the assumption that everyone experiences the world in the same way or should conform to neurotypicals. So here are 3 ways that we can promote self-compassion in an inclusive and non-ableist way. So we have to recognize that self-compassion looks different for everyone. Some individuals may struggle with self-kindness due to trauma, neurodivergence, or cultural values. So instead of expecting everyone to engage in self-compassion in the same way, we need to offer those multiple pathways to self-compassion using strength-based approaches. Many neurodivergents will have unique strengths like deep empathy or creativity or resilience. So encouraging self-compassion through these strengths rather than focusing on fixing weaknesses can be a more empowering approach. So challenging stigmatizing language is another one. So many people struggle with self-compassion because they have these internalized negative societal messages about themselves. And us as mental health professionals need to help individuals challenge those harmful narratives and replace them with affirming and self-compassionate beliefs. And by ensuring that self-compassion practices are truly inclusive, we create an environment where everyone feels valued and understood and supported. So let's talk about the key takeaways from today's presentation next. So as we're reaching the end of our discussion, let's just take a moment to reflect on why self-compassion is essential for everyone, including our neurodivergent clients and those from diverse cultural backgrounds. Self-compassion is not just being kind to ourselves, it's a really powerful tool for our mental health, well-being, resilience, and emotional regulation. Research consistently shows that self-compassion helps our clients reduce anxiety, stress, and burnout, increase emotional resilience and self-worth, improve relationships, and professional effectiveness. However, as we've explored today, traditional self-compassion models often fail to account for the diverse ways in which people process emotions, self-reflection, and personal growth. And for our neurodivergent clients, cultural minorities, and marginalized communities, self-compassion may require more adaptation and alternative approaches. By expanding our understanding of self-compassion and making it more inclusive, we empower more individuals to access its benefits and integrate it into their daily lives. So let's discuss how we can address some of the remaining barriers to self-compassion. So although self-compassion has many proven benefits, there are those barriers that still exist that prevent clients from really fully embracing it. So a lot of these barriers can include internalized self-criticism, like, a lot of people, especially neurodivergent individuals, have spent years receiving that negative feedback that reinforces self-judgment and perfectionism. And overcoming this requires gentle and structured self-compassion exercises that feel approachable rather than overwhelming. Cultural beliefs that view self-compassion as self-indulgence, in some cultures, as we've discussed, it is seen as selfish or unnecessary, especially in collectivist societies that emphasize the group needs over individual well-being. So the solution is really to frame self-compassion in a culturally relevant way, like emphasizing that taking care of yourself allows a person to better support their family and community, because that's just the fact. Lack of accessible self-compassion resources. A lot of self-compassion interventions rely on those written exercises, silent meditation or mindfulness, or traditional therapy models. And these just aren't suitable for neurodivergent individuals or people with disabilities. Some neurodivergent individuals and some people with disabilities. So alternative formats like movement-based, mindfulness, visual prompts, audio-based exercises can just make it more accessible to all. So by recognizing and addressing these barriers, we can work towards a more inclusive approach to self-compassion that meets the needs of all of our clients. So let's just summarize the key takeaways from today's discussion. So to conclude, we'll review the key takeaways. So compassion, vital tool for mental health and resilience, but traditional approaches don't work for everyone. Neurodivergent individuals face unique challenges in developing self-compassion, including difficulties with emotional regulation, executive function, and self-perception. Self-compassion is deeply influenced by cultural beliefs, and it's important to adapt strategies to be culturally sensitive and respectful. Mental health professionals and educators have an ethical responsibility to promote self-compassion in a way that's inclusive and accessible to all. Alternative self-compassion strategies like movement-based mindfulness, cognitive reframing, structured self-kindness exercises make it more approachable for neurodivergence and for marginalized individuals. By integrating these insights into therapy, education, and daily life, we can really create that inclusive and supportive world where everyone, regardless of neurotype or cultural background, can benefit from self-compassion. Thank you for your attention through this presentation. Let's move on to some discussion questions where we can explore these ideas further. So now that we've explored the many aspects of self-compassion, we can reflect on some key discussion questions. A first question could be like, how can we tailor self-compassion strategies to be more effective for our neurodivergent clients? What specific challenges do they face in practicing self-compassion? What alternative techniques have you seen or used that might help individuals that struggle with the traditional self-compassion practices? And how can we bridge the gap between existing self-compassion models and neurodivergent needs? I invite you to share your thoughts, experiences, and ideas on this topic. So the second discussion question is focusing on an ethical consideration when promoting self-compassion. Like, what ethical responsibilities should we consider when we're teaching self-compassion? How can we ensure that self-compassion strategies are introduced in a safe and non-harmful way? What ethical concerns arise when we're promoting self-compassion in clients who struggle with trauma, self-criticism, or cultural resistance to self-care? How can we balance self-compassion with accountability, ensuring that individuals are practicing self-kindness while taking responsibility for personal growth? So I invite you to take a few moments to think about these important ethical considerations. Finally, let's discuss the impact of cultural background on self-compassion. How does culture shape an individual's perception and practice of self-compassion? How do individualistic versus collectivist approaches or cultures influence self-compassion approaches? What are some barriers that people from different cultural backgrounds face when engaging in self-compassion practices? How can we adapt self-compassion techniques to be more culturally inclusive and sensitive? This is a really important conversation as cultural perspectives shape how self-compassion is understood and practiced. So that brings us to the end of the discussion of expanding self-compassion, neurodivergence, ethics, and cultural considerations. So throughout this presentation, we explored the importance of self-compassion and its benefits, the gaps in existing research, particularly regarding neurodivergent individuals, how culture and ethics impact self-compassion practices, practical strategies to make self-compassion more accessible and inclusive. I hope this discussion has provided some valuable insights and encouraged some new ways of thinking about how we approach self-compassion for ourselves and others. Thank you for your time.